free to engage as we go through this presentation. Without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Trent Yeo. He's a bit of a global hybrid based on his DNA makeup and where he's been around the world, and it's probably very apt he's a global hybrid because, of course, he's based in Queenstown and he is the owner and director of Ziptrek Ecotours. Trent is also the licensee for TEDx in Queenstown. And I'm sure you would agree it's very easy to gush right now about the glowing success of our booming tourism industry, which is racking up record after record as the world swoons on New Zealand. But where is this all heading? Is tourism in danger of, down the track, becoming a dirty word? Well, Trent, I think, is here tonight in many respects to prick a few balloons, prick a few consciences with some very timely questions, observations and ideas. What happens when your brand promise, for example, doesn't meet your brand delivery? 100% pure. Are we currently staring down the barrel of a sustainability crisis with tourism in New Zealand? And what about capacity? What about capability facing the future of the tourism industry? To tackle some of these thorny concerns, please welcome Trent Yeo.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you very much, Christchurch, for having me on this beautiful evening. Thank you for coming all the way here on in your spare time, and welcome everyone online. Thank you very much, Mike. I am a little bit of a global hybrid. I like that term. And I'll talk to you about that in a moment, because that sort of helps you understand a few of the lenses that I look at the world through. But first, I'm going to take us back to 2007. And this is what New Zealand looked like in 2007.
Legend says this land was hauled from the ocean like a giant fish. And then it waited. In fact, these islands waited until every other country had been discovered before any human ever set foot here. Welcome to the youngest country on earth.
Can you imagine when this race is run? Turn our golden faces into the sun. Forever young, I wanna be forever young. Do you really wanna live forever? Forever, forever.
So I love this advertisement. Sorry to interrupt the beautiful advertisement. I like it because it's got a sweet 80s track in it. I like it because it represents so many things that I think about New Zealand. This sense, almost healthy naivety, friendliness, openness, all of this sort of stuff which we may or may not take for granted. But it doesn't exist everywhere in the world. And these places don't exist everywhere in the world. So I love this ad. It was back to 2007. It's probably my favourite campaign from Tourism New Zealand. I'm not sure what you guys think. But I think it really sort of goes back to what I really think I suddenly understood when I stepped onto the land in New Zealand 10 years ago. But first, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey through my crazy existence as a Chinese, Malaysian, Australian, permanent resident, very proudly new Kiwi, with Canadian business partners. I'm very good at not really fitting in so well and being a bit of an outsider and always kind of maybe saying things that most people may or may not agree with, but I'll say it out loud. So be kind to me, but be nice to me. He says, be like Panda. He's black, white, and he's Asian. Not so chubby, but I just thought that was kind of funny, so I put that slide in more than anything. So I'd like to talk to you about the experience economy. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a roller coaster, and hopefully I won't lose too many people on the way, and hopefully you'll come together at the end and realise there was a point to all of this. Okay? So I'd like to talk to you about the experience economy. Who has heard or contemplated this concept of the experience economy? Anyone? Yeah? Little people? Hopefully there's no doctorate in experience economies here. The experience economy is something I came across fairly recently, and for me it sort of put a lot of things in a bit more clarity. I think that in tourism we've actually always been quite good at delivering experiences or contemplating how an experience may be taken home or received. It's the idea that we moved from an industrialized into an industrialized economy, and things became more from commodities and goods to services to then experiences, and then could it move up to, or could the delivery of business move to a point of transformation? Now, I'm not sure how many of you guys are in business and think about the work that you do as a possibility for forming transformation of other people. Now, that's a big picture thing, and I high five to everyone trying to do that, because I think if we aim that high, at least we'll get close. My dad used to say to me, if you aim for the moon, at least you may get to the top of the tree. And now I'm in zipline, Flying Fox Ecotourism. So I got pretty close, okay? I'll talk to you about that in a moment also. So the experience economy is many things to many people, but I suppose when it comes down to it, it's really about the memories that we can help to create for people. And then for us in tourism or in whatever field you are, what you connect with that memory. That's the important bit, okay? So this will become maybe a little bit clearer as I go. If I go to there, I will click on that.
Dad, Billy Scott says his batch is better than ours.
Oh, yeah? Why is that then?
Because he's right on the beach, and we're way up on the hill.
Well, you get a nice view when you're up high.
When the road gets dark and you get no loss, just let my love throw a spark and have a little faith in me.
You first.
Yes, time is our friend, 'cause for us there is no end. Geronimo! Woohoo! Marty!
We believe if you can dream it, you can do it.
So this was also around, as I was starting my business, I was thinking, yes, this is the right country to start a business like this. I thought this ad is actually quite beautiful. It helps us to go back to a time, and maybe all of you didn't grow up in New Zealand, but I know in where I grew up, flying foxes were a part of childhood. They kind of remind us of childhood, right? Swings, flying foxes, these sort of dangerous but fun things that you should do when you're young. And I love this ad because this dad sort of said, oh, I'm going to make the most out of this situation. I can be creative. We can do better than that. And he came up with something which was, a Hilux ad. But so we walk forward to this triangle, a pyramid, and it talks about the experience economy in sort of another way to break it down. And it talks about all of the different pieces that move from, if it moves. Oops, there we go, I'm sorry. Animation, it's good fun. So from functional to life-changing, emotional to life-changing to transformational moments. Basically, this is another way to break down what would be called the experience economy. And can we move to self-transcendence? I know that when I studied outdoor education, we always said we couldn't actually do that. It wasn't really possible. That was another research piece. But I think that we should all be moving towards that and contemplating how we actually might be creating a memory for somebody and then creating and attaching something positive to that. So, I told you I was going on a roller coaster. We're going to Asia now. It's a very big place and it's growing fast. Who's been to Asia in the last 2 years? Planning to travel to Asia in the next couple of years? Yep. So it's hard to describe until you go to Asia, in my opinion. The rate of change, the significant development. I remember being in Beijing in 1993 and then going back in 2002 and almost not recognising the city. I've seen significant growth even in developed places like Singapore. These places are growing really fast. You've heard it all before, rising middle class. We've got more people travelling and wanting to travel and be worldly than ever before in our time. I was recently looking at the figures just on Golden Week and it was quite amazing. So here's a map which represents the centre of gravity of economic development, or GDP. And you can see as the Industrial Revolution hit, it moved towards what we call the West. And now it's rapidly charging back to an easterly direction. Basically, I suppose you know that, but it's a really interesting diagram to show conceptually what this means. Now, this is another one of 10 years of aviation growth, in the last 10 years of aviation growth, and where it's come from. Asia Pacific is going crazy. Now, the reason it's important for New Zealand as a country is because we're right next to it. The other reason it's really important is because we happen to be strategically, not really purposefully strategically, but between Asia and South America. So that means the movement of lots of things, and particularly people, is happening, is going to happen. The two actual significant growth areas are actually Middle East and Asia Pacific. But you can see how big Asia Pacific is in terms of sense of scale. $437 billion worth of aviation, money in aviation, $12 billion, around $12 billion to the New Zealand economy for tourism from last year. So it's big, okay? I just want to say it's big. Tourism's big. We're going to be affected by it. We need to be prepared for it, and I'm not sure everyone needs to prepare in different ways, right? So then we've got the obvious maybe discussion to that is this whole sustainability, what I call the sustainability imperative. Okay, so we all live in an amazing place where we drink water out of the tap and we go out for fresh air. We go out for fresh air. Some people go in for fresh air, right? That is a fundamental difference. Most major cities in the world, and not just in Asia, but most major cities in the world, you don't go outside for fresh air. And I think that's really sad. So, knowing that we have that, and knowing that we all ostensibly want to look after that, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to relate it to people as they come here? And how are we going to make what we do value adding for our communities and not detracting? So yes, we know we can make money from tourism as an example, or from business of delivering to other people, but what else are we going to do? How are we going to build communities around this? How are we going to repatriate soil quality or water quality? How can we make this better through tourism than worse through tourism? Because we all know we can make money, okay, if you wanted to. Okay. So, I like this slide from NASA. Has anyone seen this slide from NASA? I continuously get rid of my punchlines by doing that. So, I like this planet because the air is free and the breathing is easy. I think it's my favourite planet in the solar system. I'm not sure if anyone has more favourite planets than Earth. But as much as we like to discuss traveling and moving to Mars and beyond, to the moon and beyond, to a space orbiting station of humans. As much as the technology is cool, the Earth is very, very, very good right now. And we have a chance to either protect it and or spend a lot of energy trying to find other places that sort of replicate it, right? So I like the Earth because the air is free and the breathing is easy. I'm going to step back again. So I studied architecture, actually. But the whole way through studying and then through a little bit of practice, I was trying to redesign systems so that they integrated within nature and natural systems. And at a certain point, whilst doing outdoor stuff, I actually realized I don't need to build anything. I just need to take people out into the things that are working so well and help them to understand how those natural systems are working. In order for them to help them to appreciate it, build rapport and relationship with that thing, so they could apply it to their lives, let's say. So I realized I didn't need to build anything. I could actually just show people what was already happening. It's pretty simple. So I stopped doing architecture. I may go back, but that's another discussion. So I went to tourism, and this is what I do now. Also beautiful. So I moved from the previous slide, which was my favourite building in the world, in New Caledonia, to what is my favourite place in the world now, is in my town of Queenstown. And this is what we do. So it's a flying fox / zipline, and here's a little video. So this is kind of a whole lot of fun as well. It's kind of like a big version of the Hilux ad. It's for adults as well as kids. We take people from 6 years old all the way to, so far, 93 years old. But the most important thing about what we do is now every time somebody comes out on this activity in Queenstown, I believe we've told them a story of New Zealand seeking out and valuing a sustainable future. The people that come out on this tour learn about the systems around them. They learn what Ziptrek has done within that context, and then learn what they could do within their lives. Now, we don't talk to them as if it's school. We tell a story, and we integrate it with what happens to be one of the funnest things you could do, which is going on a flying fox or zipline. The actual infrastructure of what we do is we have built it in a location where it does not need transport. A huge part of impact of anything is transport. So we have the gondola access. We are building in live trees. Trees are awesome because they're not steel and concrete, which has high embodied energy and lots of other impact. The trees themselves are self-healing and very structurally sound. They're also awesome to look at. We have tree houses that are built out of timber, sequestering carbon instead of steel structures, which also happen to be beautiful to touch. We actually have solar, which runs remote area power supply for gating systems, Wi-Fi networks, and all the other sort of background stuff, which is seamlessly in the background as we zip through the environment. We tell a story. We tell a story about our business and what we are doing, and we hope to inspire other people to actually redesign things around sustainable systems. So we have what is on the front cover of the current Kia Ora magazine. Anyone who's flown this month will have seen this. Air New Zealand is a big company in New Zealand, and they are doing amazing work and quite deep and broad work in sustainability. And it's really exciting to see how they're pushing themselves and directly pushing out the questions that are the elephants in the room, particularly around carbon or waste. Like, they're really hitting it really hard, and I'm really impressed with the goals that they have and the breadth in which their sustainability plan talks about that. I think it's a really good example. Has anyone seen the movie The Last Paradise? It came out a few years ago. It was quite interesting, but I'm really interested in New Zealand as this concept of one of the last paradises on Earth. And I've sort of got a bit of a personal mission to try to learn about these last paradises on Earth and what each of those places is actually doing within that context, whether they're really helping themselves or not. I wonder whether New Zealand is making the right decisions. I was looking at an article on Iceland. Has anyone been to Iceland before? No, you've been to Iceland? Is it a cool place?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be amazing to go to see Iceland.
It's not a very, very cold place as well, usually.
It's very cold.
Cold
The
and
name insinuates cold, hey. It wasn't on the pack. Iceland is a really interesting example because it's actually discovered tourism very recently, and it's growing very, very fast. And there's now flights that are quite cheap from Europe to the States, right? Is that how you got to Iceland?
Yeah, from London to Iceland was about £60 or something.
£60 to get to Iceland. And when were you there, actually?
Off-season, so it would have been like middle of summer here, but over there it was kind of just at the end of their winter.
2 years ago or 3 years ago? Or?
About 2 years ago, 1 year ago.
Okay, cool. Now, I think Iceland's a really good example. There's just been some articles recently about the growth in tourism in Iceland because it's going gangbusters. And I wonder whether that's not a good example of what to look at, of what we need to be careful of. Because New Zealand, if you look at, I think it was TripAdvisor data that looked at the countries in the world that everyone wants to go to. This is a list. New Zealand's top 10, right? And in the countries in the world where I'm actually going to, as in USA, I really want to go there, but a lot of people are actually making it there. But New Zealand actually is very, very low on the I made it there and very, very high on the I want to be there, which means it's either an opportunity or a disaster waiting to happen, right? And New Zealand is a very remote place for the rest of the world, right? So we understand that. But that's, as flights are coming down and airplanes are becoming, flying an airplane is basically cheap, and visas are becoming easier, it's going to all change. So we've just got to really work out what we're trying to do with that and in that context. This happened recently, and it was fascinating. This is quite amazing. In the world, there's not many places that are taken out of protection of national parks into another status. Sometimes they might be downgraded so mining can happen, for example. But this has been taken out of national parks and is acting as its own entity with representatives of that entity. Right? It's kind of a bit hard to understand, but in many Indigenous ways of knowing, the land is a person in itself, or the land, for example, owns them in the reverse, right? So anyway, so instead of this idea of national park status, legal status and protection, it's actually quite different. And maybe let's see what happens out of this. But this is the sort of stuff that hits The Guardian, right? This is the sort of stuff that gets worldwide attention. And I believe that this is the sort of stuff that can set New Zealand apart. But let's just see what happens out of this anyway. That's just very recently anyway. The thing we don't want is something like this. Cruise industry's latest sustainability report doesn't contain data on sustainability. So that's not ideal. That's not a good title. So basically the report talked about how there's really no discussion around waste, one of the largest things you would contemplate for cruise ships or cruise industry. And it wasn't pointed at any specific, it was actually the whole report and the whole thing. You have to hit the elephants in the room, otherwise the world of transparency will rip you wide open. And maybe it was badly written, so it didn't report the things that they meant it to report, but either way, that's the title that came out the other end. So, is there any questions or statements at the moment? No, everyone's following along.
Fully
okay.
attentive to you, Trent.
Okay, so I can take you on another direction here. A technological change which is happening all around us. There's so much stuff. There is so many technologies in the world which are affecting our lives very, very directly. Some of which you know, some of which you don't know. And they will change the way humans interact with each other. A little bit was talked about this morning with VR and AR discussions. All the technological changes are possibly happening in our pocket with our phone, which is now a medical device, or is a tracking device, or is a way in which to identify birds in the wilds. These sensing technologies and AI engines that are processing data about you that you currently don't really own or control, these are things that are affecting us right now. I remember when I went to the States in something like 92, and I was thinking, oh, this is really cool technology. I was there, I was young and interested in VR stuff and this whole gaming thing. So I went to this place and went to this VR place and played this game, and we thought, oh, these are going to be everywhere. It's going to be on the street corner and it's going to change the way in which we interact and all that sort of stuff. And basically it went through what's called the trough of disappointment, because it didn't do anything for ages. And actually VR technology has been around since the 80s, and actually I think even the late 70s. But now there's a whole lot of things that are changing, not only in the technological element, the hardware, but also the software. There's also critical cultural changes that are allowing these technologies to come in. Things like, examples like the Google Glasses, which came and went. They were socially not acceptable, were interesting. Pokemon Go, in a flash, came up and went, but at least it helped people to understand what augmented reality was, because people didn't understand it otherwise. But either way, it doesn't really matter what's happening. When you look around, you'll actually see these technologies actually becoming real, and now. And I'm going to talk to you about some examples of those. First one being an AR example, something that I tried fairly recently, the HoloLens. Has anyone been in HoloLens yet? Yep, one person. Excellent. Okay. And it's pretty weird.
Look around. Technology is all around us. We use it in every aspect of our lives. It enables us to do amazing things. But what if we could go further? What if we could go beyond the screen? Where your digital world is blended with your real world. Now we can. This is the world with holograms. What will they enable us to do? New ways to visualize our work.
I have an idea for the fuel tank.
New ways to share ideas with each other.
How are things going your end?
I just put the images in OneDrive.
Perfect.
More immersive ways to play. New ways to teach and learn.
So put the new trap in the place of the old one.
Now what?
And tighten here and here.
New ways to collaborate and explore the places we've never been.
Look at this formation. Let's take a closer look.
So I kind of think that right now, people have, as an example, people have designed a pencil and put it in front of you, and you're like, yeah, cool, so I can do stuff with a pencil, right? I can draw on a piece of paper. But we haven't really contemplated what we could do with this technology even yet.
Because when you
I'm glad there's a little bit about how to change the U-bend in your
change the
plumbing, because otherwise I was thinking, what is the usable reason that I've got this technology? And I think a lot of people think the same until it got to that bit, so I'm glad they had that. But there's actually so many ways in which we can use this, and that it's going to add value to humanity, as opposed to just be a cool piece of tech which other tech people will be really interested in. Okay, now, but this is all real. So that's a bit of a pilot of the things that can happen. But when you put the HoloLens on, it actually maps the whole environment around you. And have you done it, Mike, actually?
No, I haven't.
You should try that thing. It's pretty crazy. So it's mapping the ground here and the ground over here and the chairs over there. And then it's projecting stuff onto surfaces. And in fact, it could make a surface, you can actually go through a surface into another world. Let's say back in time, okay? Or through the other wall, or whatever the case may be. So anyway, the technology is around us, and I'm interested at the extreme level, what happens if travel and tourism becomes augmented? What happens if part of my experience, if not the whole experience, becomes virtual? Okay? Now, we could say, well, that's not the same, that's not what we want, and that's really what New Zealand is not. And I agree with you. But I think we need to think about how it may affect, for example, pre-travel, getting excited about something. Post-travel, capturing that memory that we take home and take to our friends. Or any of the other million things that we haven't even possibly thought about. Once again, it's not specifically about tourism here. It's really just about the way in which we interface with the world is going to be different in the future. And we don't exactly know what that looks like. So, here's one that's directly affecting us right now. What I'd love to do but I don't have the technology, is have an emotional meter to measure the emotion in the room when people see Airbnb. Because I love the idea, and it also is perplexing and interesting, how some people are really, really, really against these concepts of Airbnb, and some people are really pro them, and maybe people in between. But I think it actually gets an emotional response. But here in front of us are the values of a company which I think have come upon something quite unbelievable. And what it is the sharing economy, which we have heard about before, an example of the sharing economy, but they've come up with a technique, a technology, a use for other people to share expiring inventory / empty bedroom / shed or boat / castle or treehouse. People are sharing their own homes, and yes, for sure, for those people in tourism and particularly hotels maybe, they are using it as commercial gain and not paying the right things and not being part of a community. But the whole idea of Airbnb was not that. The whole idea of Airbnb was to, in this case, to belong, to feel like you are part of a community as opposed to visiting a community, which I think is beautiful. And from my own personal experience has been great. I've stayed in yachts on top of crazy stores in middle of a Chinese large-scale city and lots of other really amazing places. So I think it's offered me lots of amazing personal experiences that I'll never forget. I can tell you I've stayed in more hotels that I will forget the experience. These things are quite different. And what they've touched upon is something about the uniqueness of place and the idea that everyone wants to be a local, right, in some way, shape or form. Now, that vast generalisation, but I think that that's relatively true. Has anyone, so without getting too many people in trouble, who stayed in an Airbnb before? Keep your hands up if they were a positive experience. Great. Has anyone got one booked for the future? Yep, cool. Who would never, should I say, never do Airbnb? Okay, cool. Okay, so, I mean, it's always a mixed room. It's always really interesting. I would always say, if you're not sure or you don't like something, try it, because that's the only way you can really tell. And I think it's what it is showing the technology and how values are connected to the technology and what the opportunities that exist out of it. It's not about Airbnb specifically. So, coming into the middle, it's not the middle of the presentation, it's the middle of the talk, is some ideas that I'd like to throw up, and I'm just going to throw up a whole range of words, and because these things represent some of the, in this case, tourism trends or niches that we look at and see growing, and some of the technological or cultural changes that are happening. People who are location independent. There's so many people in the world that are location independent. They might have 2 homes, they might have 10 homes, they may not have a home, they may float around. I know lots of them. I'm kind of sort of traveling and working as well. You've got blockchain data. So without going to the technology too much, but how much do you think you control? It'd be interesting to find out how much you think you control data about yourself. Because in my opinion, you should own information about yourself, or at least have clear access of it. At the moment, I don't really think, we're moving to a world where I don't really think that people are really contemplating that. I think it's really important, and something like blockchain technology will help you to control information about you. And that's really important because particularly if you're talking about delivering an experience, you actually may hold information about people which will make their experience better or worse. Like, oh, they have 2 children. They like to sleep on the top bunk. They like the something paper or whatever delivered to them in the morning. Personalised experiences is part of the new trend of tourism, where we know about you and we'll deliver you everything so it's personalised just for you. But who controls that information? And that's the question that I have for people. So then we've got, digital sharing economy, self-driving vehicles. Is there any self-driving vehicles in Christchurch at the moment? I mean, there's maybe some Teslas, but I'm not sure if they're...
The airport's going to launch one shortly.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's going to change the way taxis and people movements happen around the world, for better or worse. Uber's really invested in that, and there's lots of places in the world where they're testing that sort of stuff. I know it's scary. It's weird when all sorts of things take over in our lives. I'm sure the generation before us thought the same about many things in our lives right now. But anyway, what I'm saying is, I think there's this creativity in the middle which has to intersect with, I suppose I don't really know what may come out of it. But I think that it really needs to be based on values, because I think that what we are currently doing is not connecting a business system or an economic system or a technological system with the values that we hold dear to ourselves. Not only as individually, but as business, maybe as a country. I think that we need to really look at how we deliver that. And so obviously, the 2 concepts obviously that I've put up there are kaitiakitanga and manaakitanga, which were in the Tourism Strategy 2015 when I first arrived in the country, and now not in there. So I would say they should be back in there. And in my final examples, I've got 2 examples, or 1 if I don't have time.
Before you do that...
Yes, please.
Can I just throw in a few questions? First of all, do you think there's any data available as to whether it's locals or international travellers who have a preference for personalised experiential tourism, or is it both? Does it transcend where you come from?
I don't know if there's any data about it at this point. It would be interesting because there's more coming out there's been some recent mobile phone data that's being grabbed and reconfigured, but I haven't looked at that yet. Sure. I don't think there's any data. I don't know whether it matters, though, whether it's a domestic or international traveller. I think that to some point people might go, oh, that's cool, you know that I like that. But sometimes you're like, wait a second, how do you know that? That's freaky, right? And I'm not really that comfortable with you knowing that. So I think there's 2 responses that I personally also have that are very real. But the fact is, I think that we should get involved in that conversation. And you could also say, okay, what happens if in all international tourists, we could not track them, but like all mobile phone information gets collected and anonymously placed. Yeah. So we knew what the movements were, what they were interested in, what they're looking up, so I think there's lots of opportunity in that world. The question is, it falls in those gaps of who does that and who should hold that information and who should give them the right to do that.
Sure. Another question, you mentioned Air New Zealand making a big splash on sustainability. Aside from them, do you have, like, top of mind any other standout tourism businesses in New Zealand that are walking the talk?
So there's not a lot of examples. I think on the technological side and the experimental side, something that happened here in Christchurch, the Juicy Snooze accommodation, which you may or may not have seen recently. It's like those pod sleeping. And I think that's really a very interesting addition to the types of accommodation that people might like. Personally, I think it's a great idea. I just can't sometimes want to just fall asleep and then get up and do stuff and be interactive with people. It's self-check-in, So there's a few technology and cultural pieces, because that sort of stuff hasn't existed in New Zealand, and that's classically the Japan. What are they called in Japan?
Capsules.
Capsule hotel. Has anyone seen a capsule hotel, actually? Now, I've stayed in one which is like the pods, not the coffin style where you get into the morgue style where you slide yourself in. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I'm not sure whether I would do it all the time, but I actually think it's part of the diversity of the type of things that people might like. In terms of sustainability, there's lots of big companies doing amazing stuff. I'm not sure whether it's also expressed out loud. So that's another thing. It's one thing to do the work. It's another thing to talk about it. And I know that a lot of people have concern that, I'm not doing that much, so I don't want to tell people. But I think it's part of your story.
Is there also one other question here before you proceed? Is there also a danger that some businesses may think, okay, I'll jump on the sustainability bandwagon because we think we should, rather than them being genuinely invested in the whole notion of it?
So maybe a couple of answers to that. I think that anyone who's going down a path of improvement in any way, shape or form should be encouraged. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether it is recycling or worm farm or fluorescent globes or whatever, and all the way to you support your whole network of homeless youth and you offset all your carbon from X and Y. I think all of the spectrums we need to encourage. It's hard. It's very easy to criticise. It's very easy to get, okay, they're only doing a little bit. But I think we need to encourage people. By the same token, we also need to be realistic about where we are on the path. Because if we're all going through a path of improvement, we should all encourage people. But we should definitely commend the people doing high-end work, and also say, hey guys, you guys can really do a lot better. So I think that people should always try to move in that direction because it's the right thing to do. It's super efficient and that's fun. Like, I think efficiency is fun. And absolutely that will lead to bottom line or economic improvement anyway. The other thing is, if you're really connected to it and you don't really have an idea about how the environmental thing might work, get connected with your community. Because the social, cultural stuff is really important. And that could be the thing that brings along everything else anyway. So when you're talking about sustainability, I always talk about, let's say the triple bottom line. And I always will think about whether you're more environmental or more cultural, and think about where you could do work on that anyway.
Sure.
Did I answer that question?
You did.
I did, yeah. Cool. So I'm just going to go to this one. You'll like this one. Oops.
Goedemorgen. Allegra. Willkommen im Bündeland. Ja, guten Tag, schöne Frau. Goedemorgen.
Morgen, Bro.
Hey, Allegra. Het is kurz Zeit. Ja, du. Hallo. Darf ich einladen?
Ja, mach ich mal.
Was will ich da, Freund? Einladen, das Billett draussen.
Okay.
Oh, jetzt ist es voll.
Ja, das ist gültig heute.
Nur heute.
Heute habe ich nie Zeit. Oh, I'm saying, komm zu ihm.
Jetzt gerade.
Das ist ein bisschen spontan. Danke vielmals.
Jetzt müsst ihr einfach auf den Zug.
Okay. Dann Sie mit meinem Chef reden.
Ja, da muss doch geschwind anrufen. Das ist nicht so wichtig mit dem Chef.
Ist gut.
044
446.
Silbermann, der kommt heute Nachmittag nicht in die Schule. Dann kann ich auf dich rechnen.
Ich weiß es nicht.
Das ist mit Kinderkrippe da. In einer Viertelstunde fährt der Zug. Das haben wir gerade noch.
Also, wir bis nachher.
Ja, dann kommen wir.
Ja, ist gut.
Bis nachher.
Also, wir kommen.
Hey, super. Ja, das ist super.
Tschüss.
Hey, ciao. Ja, hallo. Kommen.
Hallo, danke.
Mal reisen.
Ja.
Ja, das ist gut. Hey!
Ja.
So Zilman will not come to school this afternoon. I like that. So I love this ad. It hits so many different pieces for me. So I think the first part of the discussion is that New Zealand should totally have an amazing rail system that goes up and down the whole length of the country. So can somebody work that out, please? Firstly, because then we could absolutely do an advertisement like this. Until then, it's very hard. I think I love this advertisement because that guy represents that town and he's everything you would like to have as a welcome to a place. I like this because they've personalised travel or movement or places. They've made it a personal welcome. They've made it absolutely accessible and maybe a little bit frivolous as well. I like the idea that it's kind of ad hoc. I think this is a good example of a tourism campaign where the values of what they are trying to do in terms of their experience are represented in what they are delivering in terms of their marketing. And I think the value alignment to whatever we do needs to be fundamentally at the core. We need to make decisions based on our values. And I think that we can do better with that if we recognise very clearly what our values are, which actually, if you go around the country, and I know that I've done this in our community, we've done this in our community, when we argue and argue and argue and argue, and we actually write down, actually, this is important to us or me, it's absolutely the same thing. So I think there is alignment in values about what we have in terms of country. There's not necessarily alignment in terms of execution. But I think that once we can start to do that, we'll see real success as a country. And I think that we absolutely have a responsibility to do that. So when people use carbon to come here, when we travel around our country, I think we have a responsibility to show them the best of that place and help them not only to have the best of that place, but take a bit of that idea of adventure and travel and wandering back to their own place and bring it back to the place that they live in. I think travel is a very, very important part of humanity and we should encourage it, but we should encourage good delivery and amazing experience all the time. Thank you.
Excellent. We have got time for some questions. If you've got one ready to roll right now, just raise your hand. I've got a question for you, given Queenstown.
Yes.
Do you believe in your lifetime there will be a cap placed on the number of visitors allowed into Queenstown?
Do I believe in my lifetime?
Over the course of a year, do you believe there could be a cap?
I believe we should immediately start to have that conversation. My example, in my experience, is of travelling to Bhutan. And Bhutan has a very interesting system. It's an amazing system, actually. They've very clearly stated what tourism's for. Tourism is to help us value our own communities and to help us expand other people's knowledge of our culture, to help us have economic value, and to help us express how sustainable we are, type thing. Now, that's not quotes, right? But they're very clearly articulated that that's what tourism's for, and then they've legislated for that. So, when you go into Bhutan, anyone else been to Bhutan here? Okay, you have to pay a minimum amount, but what that includes is all of your travel, your guides, all of your food, and a very personal experience with a very experienced and passionate person. They travel with you the whole time around the country and take you almost, not quite, but almost to their families, friends, without it being a rort, like shops or visitor places, like special places, and they treat you like you're their friend just catching up with them. So for me, as an experience, I was like, that's genuine, that's authentic, that is unique. Every time it's unique. And it hit all of the things that I think are really important in tourism. Now, that's a pretty extreme line, right? So there's a minimum spend. I think it's over $100 a day. Now, that's not, it's expensive compared to Thailand, but it's not expensive when you say, I'm going to New York. And I think the quality of experience was so far beyond anything that I've ever had before. So, to get back to the question, I think that we should very specifically have that conversation around what that would be. A lot of people's discussions around why we shouldn't have that conversation is we can't affect that. The market does what it does. I don't completely buy that. I also don't think we control everything. And unless you're going to have a closed border scenario and count people in, which would probably never fly in New Zealand where everyone gets a say, I think there's somewhere in between that where we sit. And we've always talked about high value, but I would like to question, if you're talking about numbers of people and who should come in, what is value, right? Obviously there's economic value.
Yes.
But what if those people could contribute to a community? They could get in the school and teach some stuff. They could give some music lessons or start to interact with people and give value for that they could contribute back to your community. Imagine if it was not just an economic value, economic yield thing. Now, I'm not saying that's easy. Don't get me wrong. That's really hard. But imagine if we could. Maybe we should be moving towards that. So we should have that question.
Just one final question, and obviously this has been a very topical issue lately and will remain probably for the next year or so at least. Tourism infrastructure, and how do we generate more money, particularly for areas that have a low rating base, to deliver the necessary infrastructure. How do you believe it should be funded?
I think many in various ways. I think people in tourism think that GST should go. GST is a huge part of that contribution and should be contributed back to areas, particularly with a low rate base. I believe that's true, and I believe that should happen soon, as fast as possible. I also believe that there's other ways to do that, and it may be through other gates or systems. But New Zealand's been a place where the user pays thing hasn't been so overt, or it hasn't been there really, like particularly our national parks and all the things. And there's something so beautiful about that, but it's not beautiful if it's unsustainable. So I'm not sure whether we need to look at that very hard and think about the whole picture, because I know that when I travel in lots of other places, there's a visitor tax and a whatever tax and a whatever, and I'm not that pleased by it, but I actually just say that's the total cost. It's $850, and that's the total cost. And I think that's what it costs to be in that place. I don't think that people are so price sensitive on that stuff that they would actually know. But here's what I would ask. That if we collect that money, we need to so transparently show people where that's going. Because that's what I have a problem with. I don't mind if money's collected. I just want to know that it's going to good stuff. I don't know whether that will happen. But that's what I would ask. And if I could just make a wish list, I would say GST, other gateways, let's say airport, maybe there's car stuff, particularly for our town, which is getting clogged, and then transparency on where the money goes to.
Sure. All righty. Question down the back.
You say from a tourism point of view, you see in the media things about freedom campers and, you know, that they don't seem to have facilities where they could go where they wouldn't have to dump. So that's the sort of thing you're perhaps talking about if there was money spent in even remote areas where there were facilities for them, we wouldn't see these sort of potential environmentally.
And there is an infrastructure fund which has just started, which is very small. And you guys should go for any as much as you can get as well, because once that's used, hopefully there'll be more coming online as well. Absolutely, I think that freedom camping, like the idea that we can just drive around, like I think the idea is great, but there's so many people doing it now that we can't handle it. And there's a big ethical questions around it. It's like, do Kiwis have more right or less right, or the same rights of internationals wanting to do the same thing? Because I think Kiwis would like to feel like they could freedom camp, but they don't necessarily want tourists to do it. And I'm not sure whether there's any data around whether they're more or less impactful on the land. But that would be interesting as well. I think there's a lot of deep ethical questions around every one of these conversations, though. And we have to think about how the world, like, is this the place to be free? Some places are known not to do that. Like, you would never drive around a car, let's say in China. You just wouldn't rent a car in China for lots of different reasons. You can't actually, that's another discussion. So, yeah, so I'm not sure if I specifically answered that. Freedom camping is another complex issue that multiple regions need to come together, let's say whole of South Island, whole of North Island, to try to work out where, if we're trying to push people around the country or move people to regional areas, which is very positive for New Zealand, we need to think about where they might stop and, let's say, have hubs of infrastructure that support it, and other areas which are no-go unless you have infrastructure like your own toilet to be there. But I'm not sure whether the route is very well mapped or whether there's a really, because everyone wants their town to be the town that everyone stops at, right?
So it's kind of building on top of that kind of statement is, how do you think that New Zealand as a whole should really be tackling the storytelling and promoting of New Zealand and whether as New Zealand as a whole or our individual towns within New Zealand? How do you think the promoters among us, how do you think we should be going around that kind of...
Yeah. So how should the marketing of New Zealand be handled? Yeah. I would love to see, once again you're asking me what I would love to see, what about this one? This is from, I can't remember the old movie from the 80s with Dudley Moore in it. A marketing movie, Dudley Moore, anyone got it for me? No, yeah, it was in that ilk. It was kind of like Volvos, boxy but good. You know, like instead, so I would love to see our waterways aren't as good as they're meant to be, but here's our 5-year plan. Here's our 20-year plan. Now, that's crazy. No one would do that, but I think that's why I'm not in control of the marketing budget for Tourism New Zealand. I think we should say, these are our big problems, and here's our plan to fix them. And this is how we're going. Once again, no one would ask me to be part of that board in any way, shape or form for these reasons, but I think it would be great. I think we have to manage it. And that's a risk scenario, like we would definitely contemplate how that might actually happen. 99% of people will say that's crazy.
It's a storytelling thing. If you're actually touring around like Canterbury Plains, for instance, what's happening in the plains and the intensification of farming, it's using examples. There's examples in New Zealand already where like rivers have been black, like the Ohana Murray up in the Coromandel Peninsula from gold mining and whatnot. That was banned, all the techniques and that dumping in the river. It's now pristine again. So that was in the 1950s. So there is ways of having those stories out there, and I like what you're saying. That's excellent.
I think that for sure, like when you look at the world scale, and this is the part of the challenge, is they've taken a lot of international data around what people think about New Zealand, and I think New Zealanders have a high expectation for New Zealand, which I think is good, because it's not like it's not the worst country in the world. We obviously have very arable soil and very clean, like lots of good things about New Zealand. But the ways, if we continue to treat it in a way which we maybe are doing now, I think that there's definitely some challenges. So I think that there's understanding that we have high aspirations for our country, but understanding actually our brand says we have a high aspiration for our country, right? So they have to match. So I agree with you. I think it's...
Basically, I mean, in the paper today, tourism is outstripping the dairy farming. So
yes,
we've got to find that balance where you got that, we're in cohesion, because they're both very important.
And that leads to the idea of per head scenario. Is there the current scenario is that all tourists have a negative impact on the environment and social context, but positive on the economic, right? That's our big assumption. What if every tourist planted so many trees in our riverine systems to help clean the water and or contributed to that, and had a net contribution to cultural aspects, either a shared culture or knowledge or some sort of sharing in between that. So in that case, we would want more tourists to come here because they improve our country. Now, I think the massive assumption is that they automatically negatively impact environment, culture and society, and they make some money for somebody. And I think we don't have to be like that. It's a big statement, but I believe that is true.
Do you think we need to compare the way it used to be here to the way it is now to try and keep a really good quality level as compared to just comparing it to somewhere else overseas where you can't go out and breathe the air? You know, we have to keep a tight check on how we're changing here, not compared to anywhere else.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that I don't want to be part of a generation that decided that tourism was actually bad for us, but we did it anyway. I think that we absolutely should measure quality over time. And if you look at the environmental measures or biodiversity and all this sort of other stuff, soil quality, etc., we can absolutely do that. I just think that all places on Earth are challenged. And David Attenborough will say it's because of population. He's recently come out more and more about population, right? But there's more people on Earth than there's ever been before, and each person per head is impacting the Earth more than any other previous generation or previous person. That's a fact, right? There's data. We have to consider how we can make human interaction with the Earth a positive one and not a negative one. And then a whole thing is thrown open. Sorry, is there a question back there? Or just a stretch?
Yes.
This is not actually a question, but I met with somebody last week who's part of the Sustainable Initiatives Fund Trust. Has anyone heard of that? For anybody who is interested in doing something sustainable, it's a trust available for Canterbury businesses who are looking at doing a sustainable initiative, or Canterbury groups. And they have a pool of money available that they're trying to give away.
Sustainable Initiatives Trust?
Sustainable Initiatives Fund Trust.
Sustainable Initiatives Fund Trust. That's very interesting. Good. It's a good local environment example.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's a finite pool of money. It's gone, it's gone.
Oh, I didn't realise that. There's an industry.
From the money tree.
The stream is back to that where there's the money going. So it used to go locally for local spend, but now it goes into central government, and nobody's 100% sure of how it's.
Wow. I did have a question here from Alana about some of the slides you showed during the presentation, whether they are available after the presentation. I assume they will be available via the YouTube page? Yep, on the Facebook group that you can join if you haven't already. All of that data and imagery will be available there, Alana, wherever you are. Hello, Alana. Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Yes, sir.
I have one. How do you, in your opinion, how do you think we're going to adjust to the change in, my example would be Franz Josef Glacier and Fox Glacier and the Punakaiki rocks and things like this, which are changing. So, as you know, Franz Josef is retreated like a kilometre or something up the valley. Once that's gone, how is Franz Josef and the likes of these places have a natural tourist attraction? If they're gone, how will they cope with tourism, and what will they do to bring people back into there?
So there's some Punakaiki, Franz Josef and Fox, but other examples, not just West Coast, but how do places deal with massive environmental change that's happening in our lifetime, and how do they adapt their tourism opportunities? A whole lot of creativity. I think that I'm also a big fan of diversification out of tourism, even though I'm in tourism. I think that tourism as part of the experience economy is great, but it's not the only thing that New Zealand can do. So I would say if there's tourism opportunities, they do exist in Here's one example. Imagine if you could go back to Franz Josef, and see it in a state 10 years ago, and then take off the goggles and see it now, and think about the effect of climate change upon this earth. Yeah, right? So I think that there's lots of opportunity, and that's just a made-up example in the top of my head, right? That would be shocking for somebody, right? Imagine seeing the time lapse of the retreating glaciers, and as you step forward, another year goes by. I think that would be very powerful. Maybe more zip lines, I'm not sure. There's a whole lot of things. I suppose I don't really know the answer. I would say two things. One is we have to think creatively about what's happening in travel and experience and the lifestyles, etc. We do have to diversify. And the technological stuff is an obvious scenario. What happens if New Zealand got into synthetic meat? Welcome to the controversy there, right? Is it more sustainable to have synthetic meat? They've got it down pat now. They've got some texture stuff happening as well as the taste and the look. Would you eat it if it was more sustainable? Maybe if it was better for you and more sustainable, would you eat it? These are questions that we're going to have to ask ourselves. They're going to happen in the next 10 years, 5 years. There's a burger place in the States which is all synthetic meat. What happens to a dairy industry when that happens? The synthetic milk. Maybe it's better than the real thing. Maybe it's cleaner than the real thing. Maybe it's got all the stuff that it was meant to have but never did. Maybe it's got none of the stuff that it was never meant to have in it. These are really big questions. I think we need to, particularly around agriculture and the traditional industries, we have a big shake-up, and I don't think we're prepared for it. Maybe we can get on the other side of it and have a response rather than be literally your industry is gone. Costs too much, it's unsustainable, it's destroying your own land because you came up with that amazing marketing thing and you didn't deliver about your rivers. Yeah, I don't know, yeah.
Fantastic.
I'm not sure I fully answered that. I tried.
Well, you've certainly raised a huge range of sobering questions and concerns and dilemmas.
Hope you don't cry tonight.
No bad dreams tonight. But yeah, no, some fascinating and really salient issues that we all have to confront, really, for the good of us all. Trent, we have a little something for you. There's a little gesture of appreciation.
Thank you, much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Let's hear it for Trent Yeo. Cheers, man. And of course, if you're going to Queenstown, make a date with Ziptrek Ecotours. You just go up the gondola, don't you, to the balcony, and it starts from there.
Well, to the left, but you'll find
to the left.
it.
Yes. He's very low impact on the environment, so there's not many signposts.
That's
I
correct.
understand. Yes. And of course, if you were here this morning with Brendan King, the VR included a bit of a taster of that fantastic Ziptrek Eco Tour. By the way, just a couple of notes in case you aren't aware of this. Tomorrow we've got 3 events kicking off with Sir Ray Avery at 7. The doors are open, aren't they? Tomorrow morning. He has been a principal contributor to Spark Labs since the inception of the series. Also tomorrow, Will Palmer from Movio, who will be running a workshop style talk on niche industries. How do you recognise an opportunity and what do you do once you have? Plus branding. Tracy Lee, she will be along. That's the last session at 5:30 tomorrow to share some very valuable brand Yoda wisdom on how to define, refine and reinvent your brand. So you're very welcome to join us for any of those events. Just use that Mobi site to register. Thank you again to the Spark customers in the room. You are why we are here. And a reminder that on that Mobi site there are a number of features, including connections to all the social channels, ample networking opportunities obviously, and on those social channels, by the way, like on the YouTube, you can see past Spark Lab events, you can watch Trent again, and also future events like tomorrow's ones will appear on those social channels as well. Most importantly, there is a feedback function on that panel. You may have noticed it. And Spark would be really keen to get your critique, your responses to this event or any other events you are attending. Were they valuable? How would you rate it? How would you improve it? Do you want Spark Lab to come back to Christchurch with another series of events? If you've got any ideas on particular topics, genres, speakers, please use that feedback function to let us know. And as a little carrot, if you do provide some feedback, you'll be in to win $250 worth of Spark credit, and that has to be won by an audience member. So feel free to fire away with that feedback function, perhaps before you leave the venue. Many thanks once again for joining us, and have a great night. Thank you.